Welcome to the Futures Initiative podcast. My name is Shelly Eversley. At the Futures Initiative, we believe in a university worth fighting for. This means that we're working towards the public good in collaboration with the communities that we serve in order to help contribute to more just and sustainable futures. Today, we're going to talk about why LGBTQ and queer studies matters to us all. I'm here with Matt Brim, who is professor of queer studies at the College of Staten Island and the CUNY Graduate Center. He's also director of CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies here at the CUNY Graduate Center. CLAGS is, in fact, the first university research-based center in the United States dedicated to the study of the historical, cultural, and political issues of vital concern to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer individuals and communities. I'm also with Kevin Nadal, Distinguished Professor of Psychology at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice and the Graduate Center. He is a researcher and expert on the effects of microaggressions on racial and ethnic minorities, as well as on LGBTQ communities. Thank you, Kevin. Matt, welcome.
Thanks, Shelly. So good to be here.
It's awesome to have you. So my first question for you is, why does it matter? Why does queer studies matter for us all?
There's so many reasons why queer studies matter for so many of us, all of us, actually, I should say. One is that queer people and trans people exist in the world. And so as people who are humans in this society, we want to be able to create a world in which all of us feel included, in which all of us feel free, in which all of us feel liberated. And so for those of us who study queer studies and centers like CLAGS, we give people opportunity to have dialogue with each other, for people to learn about themselves, and for people to, really fight for that kind of world. And I think for me, one of the things that's so important about queer studies is that something that should just be integrated into all aspects of learning. It's not just a class you take to learn about queer people, but also just be something that you learn about yourself. Heterosexual, cisgender people have a lot to learn about their own gender or identity development and the ways in which gender roles have influenced how they interact in their everyday lives, how they form relationships with each other, how they parent, how they treat their coworkers. People need to learn a lot about their sexuality and what that means to them and how it informs the ways in which they operate. And so for me, queer studies isn't just an afterthought. It's something that is integral to the human condition.
I think queer studies matters in part because it is what in the academy we call an interdisciplinary field. And that means that no matter what you're interested in, I come from an English literature background, Kevin's in psychology, Shelly's in Black studies. No matter what background you come from, you can be interested in the kinds of difference that LGBTQ stands for and pursue that into an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, a PhD. And so whatever your interest, there's room to explore LGBTQ studies.
Yeah. I think about this when we talk about innovation at the Futures Initiative, and we talk about innovation as a collaborative process. And so when you think about, say, scientists, they work in a lab with each other in order to create new kinds of knowledges that save lives. How does that work in queer studies and thinking about collaboration?
One of the things about the university world that we are in is that sometimes it's hard to collaborate. And that is because the academy is very stratified. It's divided into tiers. We have different names for different tiers. And so I think your question is a good one, not because we already collaborate so well, Shelly.
We do.
But in order to just recognize the need to collaborate and to figure out ways to do that a little better. We are lucky because we ended up in the same room because we're in the CUNY system. We all teach at different CUNY colleges, but geographically we're close and we've had a chance to work together. But those opportunities don't come up for everybody who separated in different ways around the country in different colleges and universities. So I think it's a goal rather than a fact.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think there's something about us being able to value and honor people's expertise, people's lived experiences, and for us to all learn from each other, right? So for example, like knowing that someone might be have more of an expertise in something that I'm unfamiliar with, I have the opportunity to learn from them, and that maybe I can contribute something to their line of thinking as well. And when it comes specifically to queer studies, I always think about the ways in which every single discipline can integrate queer studies into their curricula, or even in just to their schools of thinking. So for example, like I always say, like, well, even an architect can learn about queer studies because they are the ones who design the buildings in which we navigate and live, and which we try to be inclusive of gender and make people feel safe, right? Even medical doctors need to definitely be aware of queer studies because they need to understand that people's bodies are all very different and people have different identities that shape the ways in which they receive health care, right? And even people who are, in business and management, to know that queer studies can actually be very beneficial to them, that to be more inclusive and to build spaces in which your employees and your clientele feel safe and included and represented can actually lead for their business to become more successful. So it's not just a theoretical concept in which, we're trying to get people to be woke and people to be, think about all these things all the time for no reason, but there's actually a purpose because we really want people to just understand how humans just want to be seen and heard and included and feel safe and able to thrive in their everyday lives. And so that's why I think queer studies is so important.
Yeah. It's funny because sometimes I think that we should really consider the way the everyday moves. In some ways, the everyday is already integrated. Mm-hmm. And only when we practice division do we start seeing queer studies, for instance, as some kind of marginal or separate approach. So, for instance, I was on a plane the other day, and I went to the bathroom. There wasn't a bathroom that said women or men. Mm-hmm. It was just the bathroom. The pilot used the same bathroom. The flight attendants use the same bathroom. I use the same bathroom. Like, why do we need to worry about separating and insisting on division when more naturally we coexist?
Yeah.
It's something to think about. So I have another question for you. What do you think is the biggest misconception about LGBTQ and queer studies?
So I teach at the College of Staten Island, and we have an open access system so that all you need is a GED to become a student. And I get a lot of students who come into my classes because my classes fit their work schedule. And that means that my classes are not filled with people who identify as LGBTQ. My classes are full of straight people, queer people, all different kinds of people. And what I've learned from that is that all kinds of people can be interested in LGBTQ studies. And I think the misconception is it's a very specific or niche kind of field that's only interesting or applicable to people who live queer or trans lives.
Yeah, and building off of that, I think one of the biggest misconceptions that I think about are people who think that those of us who study queer studies or trans studies, or even that are interested in pro-LGBTQ affirming activism, is that we're just angry all the time, or that we're, have a chip on our shoulders, and that it affects like our ability to just chill and be fun, when in reality, I mean, even just the circle that we have here right now, like we're like mad fun, yo. And fun. So right, and so we know that there's the importance of advocating and trying to liberate ourselves and our communities, and we also know how to have a good time, and joy, in many ways, as many people have said, is a form of revolution, because if they can't take away our joy, then we will continue to fight, and then we'll be able to build our spirits, we'll be able to continue to be resilient, and that's how we are able to keep on pushing forward. And so for me, that's like the biggest misconception.
Yeah, we do have a lot of fun, though, don't we?
Sure do. Yep.
I mean, I wish we could get paid a little bit more,
right.
But yes. And so my question for you, and you were sitting here thinking about this some more, is, how we do the work. We have to work. And in these times, sometimes it can be quite discouraging. And I wonder how you continue working joyfully despite the circumstances.
Yeah. For me, I think it is important to acknowledge and name that it is hard to do the work, because we don't live in a world in which we're able to just be happy all the time, or even just to be optimistic all the time. There will be times in which we feel the struggle and pain and suffering and hopeless even, and that's important to name, because that's part of being human, is to recognize that it won't always be an easy road, and so I want to name that in case anyone's listening and saying, I am having a hard time. I'm having a hard time. I mean, depending on when I wake up in the morning and how and what's going on in the world, like, it is hard to sometimes have that motivation. But for me, I think the thing that keeps me going, and speaking of the Futures Initiative, is thinking about the future. I have 3 children, all under the age of 7, and they're what keeps me going, because I have to do everything I can to fight for their futures, to be brighter and to be more inclusive, and for them to have the different opportunities that I didn't have, as my parents and ancestors have fought for me and for us to be able to have as well. And that there are always going to be things in the world that are oppressive and will try to bring us down and steal our joy. But we have to do everything we can to fight against that. And again, keeping in mind that we want to make the world and the future a better place, right? I think of Whitney Houston, I believe that children are the future. So let's make sure that they feel that we did everything we could to fight for them.
That's awesome. When you said that, I believe the children are their future, I was thinking, teach them well, let them lead the way. What about you, Matt?
Well, we all have a finite amount of time and energy. And so just recognizing that and thinking, I can do 2 things today or 1 thing today. But that's a fundamental recognition. And one of the things we can recognize about ourselves is that both individually and in groups of 3 and in groups of 100, we all can resist. So whatever pressures are coming down on us, we all can exert pressure back. Sometimes we write statements that are more or less effective, but it's an act. We can be out in the streets. We can contact our legislators. We can scream and be angry. We can raise money. We can call out what we see happening that we think is wrong in as public a way as we feel comfortable. And we're each a point of resistance in that way. And if we understand that that is healthy, then joy and resistance and even anger can all be wrapped up closely together and can be sustaining, I think.
Right on. I was thinking about that song from Bob Marley where he says, if you are a big tree, we are a small axe. And I think about that in the small ways, and one of the ways that we can quietly resist, but powerfully resist, is to welcome everyone. It's such a small thing, but to create the space or the vibe around you where everyone is welcome all the time. Everyone is welcome. I wonder also what your dream for the future is. When I say that, I know you've got big dreams. I just mean in terms of LGBTQ studies. I think about queer studies. I think about the work that you all are doing in relation to the public good, to serving the community, and helping ensure more just and sustainable futures.
So, Shelly, you said that I'm the executive director of CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies, and so that gives me the opportunity to think about the work, this kind of work a lot. And one of the things that we're trying to do at CLAGS right now is to find a way. We believe that LGBT studies can do good in the world, that it's a tool for living. And so one of the ways that we want to enact that philosophy is not just to bring people we're at the Graduate Center or into the university, but we want to go out into communities where there is already a whole lot of smart queers, smart queer knowledge, trans knowledge, all of these resources that we can benefit from. And if we share what we know from our sort of formal study with what people know from their lived experience, we can come to a deeper understanding, I think, of the world around us. And so getting more of a reciprocal relationship with different people who know is important to us.
It's funny because I'm hearing you say what you're saying is reciprocity. That it's not just we're sitting in the library or the ivory tower, directing down, but we're listening and connecting with the communities that we serve, and they're teaching us. And that is one way to think about the way collaboration creates innovation. I mean, this is it. Listening and collaborating as innovation and equity.
Yeah, I mean, and if we even just look at the history of queer studies, trans studies, and even the history of ethnic studies and Black studies, Asian American studies, Latino studies, Latinx studies, it all came from resistance and being in and part of communities and ensuring that those communities were heard and represented, and that our histories were included, and that we weren't erased, and that we weren't whitewashed, pinkwashed from the ways in which we learn about the world. And so with that being said, I think for me, the big dream is for queer and trans studies to be integral into all forms of education, that it's something that K through 12 students would learn about, right? In the same way that, you learn about math and science in elementary school, you should learn about gender and sexuality and even just oppression and liberation. And for me, that dream is something then that would have large impacts on everyone. I talk a lot about in my personal life about how with my own kids, we have very early conversations as soon as they can talk about gender and sexuality and difference. And people say, how can you talk to your kids about that? You talk about these things with your kids in age-appropriate ways, in the same ways we talk about race, in the same ways we talk about social class, in the same ways we talk about unhoused people, disability. And by them having those conversations so early, it makes them feel a little bit more knowledgeable, comfortable, equipped in having those conversations with others, so that it doesn't just become something that they're afraid of or something that feels like it's uncomfortable, that's a difficult conversation to have, but it's in the same way that they can talk about, what they did today. They can talk about what it feels like to be around people who are different than them. And so that's something that I hope can happen on an institutional level, and that is something that queer studies can do, that, kids learning about themselves and relationships and how their genders impact, how they even learn. That's something that I would hope people can do.
I love that. I'm looking at you, Kevin, wearing pink, and the way that sort of has been sort of in a heteronormative context, that has been the color that teaches little girls about a gender role.
Yep.
And that's pretty easy to talk about with a child.
Yep.
It's pretty easy to talk about being a princess.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't necessarily end the value of her life with getting married to a prince. Maybe that princess becomes an engineer.
Right.
Maybe she does get married and she becomes an engineer.
Right.
It's a really easy way that we can talk about equity and we can talk about gender identity, all kinds of
maybe
things.
She meets another princess. Maybe she becomes...
Or maybe she just meets a regular person.
Right.
Or maybe she's regular.
Right.
And she doesn't have to be a princess. How about that? So how do you take care of yourself, Matt?
I'm going on vacation here in a couple hours today.
Right on.
And spending time, trying to get away is a good idea. I think because I think for people in LGBTQ studies, our work lives and our personal lives are often very integrated, so that when we're home, we're still, or in public, we're kind of still doing the work. We're still looking at the world. One of the things queer studies does really well is it looks at the world and sees the sort of invisible rules that govern us. And that shape us and that constrain us in lots of ways. And so when you get that vision that queer studies helps us to have, and you go out in the world, you're always using your disciplinary skills to think about, okay, what is happening here? And that's a question we see or we ask all the time. What is happening in this situation? Because it feels a little off. It feels a little wrong. I feel a little uncomfortable. And what is making that happen? Is that me? Is it the world? And so I'm afraid I can't get away from queer studies and queer thought, because that it has taught me to look at what we call normativity out in the world that's silently operating on us and trying to undo it.
Yeah. I love that. And I think it's very important for us to be able to get away, whether that means traveling or even just shutting things off. Like, I know that there are times where I won't look at my social media or won't read the news because I just need to rest my mind. It doesn't mean being complicit or walking away. It just means knowing that your body needs rest. And for me also, to take care of myself, it means finding things that do bring me joy and comfort and a little freedom even, right? Because when I'm with the people who I care about the most and who are aware of all these queer thought and, norms and that sort of thing, and we all just get to be, then I can turn off some of those hats and those thoughts because I just genuinely get to be who I am. And I hope that is a place that most people can find, especially if you're doing this sort of work, is that you can be in a place that makes you feel safe and included, that you don't even have to think about safety anymore. And I know that that's hard for most or many people who have multiple marginalized identities. But if we can be very intentional about creating those spaces, so at least there are some places in people's lives where they can just be, then that would be the dream as well.
Yeah.
I think if I can just jump in, that's so important, because I think sometimes we look at groups that sort of, we could call it self-segregate or try to create their own spaces, and that looks exclusive. But actually, if we have the kind of understanding that you just brought, they're really necessary spaces. And so there's a lot of compassion that can be evoked, or that we could help to evoke in others, to say, you know what, I'm not trying to be exclusive. I'm trying to be in a space where I can heal, be myself, and not always have to be on guard.
Right.
And I think everybody can understand that in some way. And so that's, I think, what groups like queer and trans groups are sometimes trying to do.
And CLAGS, what CLAGS is trying to do as well.
And CUNY's trying to do. Sure. I mean, when you think about this amazing university where we work, this public university where we work, this public university where, most people pay very, very little to get an excellent education. Yep. The thing that I love is that there is a place for every New Yorker at CUNY. We have community colleges on every borough. We have senior colleges. You can do a PhD, an MD, all kinds of degrees, law degrees. You can do all kinds of things. You can learn how to be an accountant. You can learn how to be a school teacher. And everyone's got a place here. And that is something that I think is, when we talk about a university worth fighting for, we're talking about a university for the people, for all people, rich people, poor people, queer people, straight people, broke people. All kinds of people, all people, immigrant people. So here we go. I really, really, really love talking to you. And I'm thinking about all the ways that we're talking about being hopeful and being visionary for the future, and thinking about the ways that we're going to continue this work in the service of more just and sustainable futures. And so I wonder, what happens next for your work in this moment?
At CLAGS, we have this informal mantra: we believe in free, accessible LGBTQ studies for everyone. And that is a philosophy about social class and the need to bring down divides across social class. And so I think the work that I'm really interested in doing is to try to make education, quality education, available to as many people for free, accessible in as many ways as we need to make it accessible. I think that sometimes we're worried that people have a bad opinion about college or see us negatively. And I think, first of all, when people go to college, I think they don't have that opinion because they see what it can do. But also, it's a little bit of our fault, because if we're not making college accessible financially, in terms of all different kinds of accessibility needs, then we are excluding people, and of course they're going to feel a certain way about that. So we need to open our arms even wider amidst the critique of higher ed.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that's something that CLAGS has definitely shown, or the demonstrated that's possibilities of being able to provide free public access to education, and something that CUNY, I think, is trying to do more of as well, because that's something that that we sometimes take for granted in academia, is that education should be something that people have access to, and that it's something that should be integrated into all of our society, right? That we want to be able to raise and empower people to become critical thinkers. When you think about a lot of the current problems happening in the country and even the world, that those problems continue because people just aren't critically thinking. People aren't critically thinking about the ways in which policies and violence and state-sanctioned violence specifically affects marginalized communities, especially children and people who are in situations that they don't want to be in, right? And so, so for me, one of the things that we also have to do is to encourage more people to become critical thinkers. One thing that I personally do is I try to be on social media and give away, public education. I try to be a public scholar, and my colleagues didn't necessarily like that. Like what are you doing on social media? Why are you doing all these silly reels? And I was like, but look, my ability to then reach more people than just the 20, 30 students in my classroom has increased, and that has felt even more fulfilling and meaningful, because I'll always love working with my 20, 30 students in a classroom, but I also hope that folks who don't have access to a classroom have some of that knowledge as well. And so we're in a really interesting time right now because of social media. We're seeing what the world is really like through a camera lens that's on a person's phone that we wouldn't have had access to even 10 years ago. And so can we use that power to continue to uplift people, to resist, to fight, to become revolutionaries? Because that's one thing that we have now that previous generations didn't have. When you think about previous folks who fought for their freedom, they fought for the freedom not knowing if it had worked before. What we know, it works. We know that there are movements throughout the past several centuries that have worked. And so now we have more resources to pull together, to unite, to collaborate, to form coalitions, form solidarity, so that we can fight against those systems.
I love it. I also love, I think one of the biggest takeaways when we're talking today, I'm hearing you say that we're creating accessibility. And so making reels, for instance, seems not the thing that a distinguished professor like Kevin Nadal would be doing. And on the other hand, it is the very thing that distinguished Professor Kevin Nadal is doing as an invitation for people to think more expansively, more critically, and in more exciting ways. And when I think about you, Matt, I'm thinking about the way you're thinking about free and accessible opportunities for people to learn, which is, yes, revolutionary. And revolution as change could be actually revolution as more inclusion for everyone. So thank you for that.
Of course.
Do you have any last words about how you think people might be inspired or might get involved?
Well, go to CLAGS.org. It's our website, and all of our events are free and open to the public. We're at the CUNY Graduate Center at 34th and 5th, and we would love to have, you don't need to pay anything. It's all free. We would love to have you come into this space. We would love to welcome you and get your feedback, and then potentially collaborate with you, because again, we want you to share with us as we share with you.
CLAGS.org.
CLAGS.org.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing I'll say is to jump on to something that Matt said earlier, and that is that every single person has the opportunity to make a change and to resist in their own ways. And so whether that be you having conversations one-on-one with a friend or a neighbor or someone who might not understand or might not be thinking critically about the world, or using your platform, whether it's social media or writing books or poetry or art or dance or whatever it can be, to create spaces where people have these conversations, or even larger scale to lead protests and to fight and to use your voice and your body as a way of advocating for our freedom. Everyone has to think about what they can do, and maybe it be something that every single day you wake up and you think to yourself, what is the one thing I can do to fight for liberation? And I hope folks can do that, and if we all collectively do that, then maybe we will be able to see that liberation in our lifetime.
Yeah. You know, I think about that. One of the things we can do, getting back to that small acts, is just keep on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just keep going. Some days we move slower than others.
Mm-hmm.
Some days we feel the strength that comes with being in community with our friends. And, you know, I love y'all. I love y'all both.
Love you so much.
Yeah. I mean that, like, I mean it in a very real way. And it does empower me.
Yeah.
And I know not everyone gets to have that with their colleagues.
Yeah,
No,
but that's what we need to change, right? Like, academia doesn't have to be dry and stuffy. Academia can be about love, and it could be about friendship, and we can bring our feelings and our pain and our struggles and our anger to the table, right?
But there's also a lot of reading.
I was about to say, and our intelligence.
And our intelligence.
There will be a test.
Well, in fact, what we're going to do is we are going to, at futuresinitiative.org, is we are going to post not just the full transcript of this conversation, but we'll also include resources for any curious person to be able to download and follow the links, for instance, to CLAGS, futuresinitiative.org, Kevin's Reels we'll find. And, of course, the references and show notes. Kevin and Matt have written a whole bunch of books, and we'll list them all so that people can follow you and learn more about your really, really transformative work. And if you are interested in learning more about the Futures Initiative, you can always go to futuresinitiative.org. And thank you, Matt. Thank you, Kevin, for your time and your conversation. The Futures Initiative podcast is available anywhere people listen to podcasts, and it is also going to be live on YouTube. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Amazing. I love this.
Good.